Okay, this is our video recording for milestone 3. In the last milestone, we completed the first question of mini challenge 2. So now I'm going to talk about the second question of mini challenge 2. So we found some patterns in the communication data. The first pattern is that sources and targets has different relationship based on the location. In the wetland, there were the highest number of distinct target per source, and in the entry corridor, there was the highest number of sources per target. The second pattern was that on June 6 and 7, people who communicated more would also move around more with at least 4 of the 5 locations. However, on June 8th, this pattern broke and many of the people who communicated most were moving less, with only 2 locations instead of 4 or 5. The third pattern has to do with how many people were communicating. The number of both target and source consistently has dropped at 10 o'clock and 3 o'clock on June 6 and 7. On June 8th, there was still a drop at 10 o'clock, but the 3 o'clock drop is not there. So now I'm going to pass it to Dylan.
The fourth pattern we discovered was that there was a unique identification in the target section marked external. So we looked at the highest count of those that communicated to the external target. And so you can see on this graph as it's broken down by each day and which source communicated the most with that target on a particular day. The fifth pattern we noticed is the total count of communication that was given throughout the whole park, throughout the whole weekend, as well as the external communication that happened on the bottom slide. We notice here, you see the spike on the external communication where people were targeting that external identification corresponds well to this wetland around, slightly before noon on Sunday. Next, I will pass it to Matt.
And looking at the external versus internal targets by location throughout the day Sunday, you'll see that there was a large outburst of externally targeted communication that took place at wetland at 12 p.m., followed by an aftershock at a smaller burst at Coaster Alley at 2 p.m. It's also worth noting that at 12 p.m. there was a large spike at the entry corridor. And then looking across the span of the 3 days, they're relatively flat in external targets, except you can see the bimodal peaks at 12 p.m. and 2 p.m. on Sunday. And I think this is a strong indication that the crime took place around this time frame. And it's also worth noting that there were no check-ins at the Creighton Pavilion after 12 p.m. on Sunday, which that was according to our movement data, which could be a possible suspect for the crime scene. And then looking at the 2 automated systems, what we determined to be automated systems at the park, we see that one of those IDs, the majority of its activity at 12 p.m. and 2 p.m. Those 2 large spikes there, which is most likely a park-wide alert in response to the crime.
There were no check-ins at the Creighton Pavilion after 12 p.m. on Sunday, as Matt said. It seems like the park authority closed off the area of Creighton Pavilion to people after the incident occurred. We also see that the Grinosaurus stage also didn't have any check-ins after 12 p.m., which indicates that there might have been some vandalism around that area and the park authority had to close that section too. If you look on the next slide, as Kim said, that Scott Jones might be speaking from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. So we looked up at the total number of communication done during that period. And the communication pattern looked almost similar on all 3 days, except in the first quarter between 12 p.m. and 1 p.m. on Sunday, where it showed a really big spike in the number of communications. So we think that the vandalism happened before 12 p.m.
We know the crime happened at the shows and the entertainment area, but it's not easy to distinguish Creighton Pavilion or G Stage. However, the textual data has provided some useful information. For this bar chart, we could identify there was no check-ins at Creighton Pavilion after 12 p.m. And according to the textual data, we could also confirm that Creighton Pavilion was closed after visitors reported the crime. So the Creighton Pavilion is the location where the crime happened. Next, based on the Matt and Dylan's findings, I also created a bar chart to show the senders and the receivers' communication volume. Since we know where and when the vandalism happened, we could assume that suspects must at Creighton Pavilion, and they might contact either internal or external via the park app. These 5 visitors have something in common. They all send large amounts of messages compared with other visitors in a 10 to 20 minutes range. We could assume that they discussed further vandalism details with other people and then wait for the chance to commit the crime.
The next 2 slides just touch on our remaining project and the presentation itself. This first slide is covering our outline for our project presentation, where we touch on mini challenge 1, 2, and then also the grand challenge. We'll touch on questions that we answered, visuals we selected, and why. And then the final slide will touch on our remaining project plan, which ultimately outlines the last 3 items that we have left, which are the grand challenge, the project presentation, and then the final project deliverables. This is our update for Milestone 3.